The world is changing, power is shifting, and in unexpected ways. Right now, 2 tankers linked to Venezuela's oil exports have been seized by the United States. This isn't just a story about oil or ships. It's a story about global power, sanctions, and international tension. The US military pursued the first tanker, the Marinera, across nearly 2 weeks of waters between Iceland and Scotland. A game of cat and mouse, but with far more at stake than meets the eye. The second tanker, T. Sophia, was intercepted in the Caribbean. It too was accused of illicit activities. Both ships are part of what some are calling a shadow fleet linked to Venezuela's oil industry. This is a direct confrontation between the US and those looking to evade its sanctions. And it raises a crucial question: what happens next? Let's take a deeper look. To understand why these tanker seizures matter, we need to look beyond the immediate events. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. It is a giant in the global energy market, and yet its oil exports have been strangled by US sanctions. The goal of these sanctions? To pressure the Venezuelan government and weaken its economic foundation. But Venezuela has found ways to circumvent these restrictions. Enter the shadow fleet, a network of vessels designed to operate under false flags, avoiding detection and sanctions enforcement. The Marinera, for instance, was flying the flag of Guyana before it was deemed stateless. This tactic has allowed Venezuelan oil to continue flowing to markets despite the sanctions. But with the US now targeting these vessels directly, a new phase of the sanctions war is beginning. The US has made it clear the blockade on Venezuela's oil will not be broken. But what are the consequences? Let's dig deeper into the mechanics of this conflict. To understand why these tanker seizures matter, we need to look beyond the immediate events. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. It is a giant in the global energy market. And yet, its oil exports have been strangled by US sanctions. The goal of these sanctions? To pressure the Venezuelan government and weaken its economic foundation. But Venezuela has found ways to circumvent these restrictions. Enter the shadow fleet, a network of vessels. These vessels are designed to operate under false flags, avoiding detection and sanctions enforcement. The Marinera, for instance, was flying the flag of Guyana before it was deemed stateless. This tactic has allowed Venezuelan oil to continue flowing to markets. Despite the sanctions, but with the US now targeting these vessels directly, a new phase of the sanctions war is beginning. The US has made it clear the blockade on Venezuela's oil will not be broken. But what are the consequences? Let's dig deeper into the mechanics of this conflict. To fully grasp the gravity of this moment, we must look at the history behind these actions. Venezuela's oil wealth has long been a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse. For decades, the country relied heavily on oil exports, funding its economy and social programs. But that reliance also made it vulnerable to global shifts in oil prices and political pressures. In the early 2000s, President Hugo Chavez began using Venezuela's oil wealth to expand its influence. He forged alliances with countries like Russia and Iran, seeking to weaken US influence in the region. But this strategy made Venezuela a target. When Nicolas Maduro took over after Chavez's death, the economic instability deepened. The US responded with sanctions, aiming to cut off Venezuela's primary source of revenue. As the situation worsened, the country found ways to keep its oil flowing. This is where the shadow fleet emerged, creating a new layer of complexity in an already volatile situation. Now, we're witnessing the latest chapter in this long-standing conflict. The first major escalation came with the seizure of the Marinera. This was no ordinary tanker. The vessel had been evading international scrutiny for weeks. It was a classic example of the shadow fleet operating under a false flag, trying to avoid detection. US forces pursued the Marinera for almost 2 weeks. Its path took it through the waters between Iceland and Scotland. The tension mounted as the U.S. Coast Guard and Royal Navy worked together to track the vessel's every move. Finally, they boarded the tanker. But what makes this more than just a routine seizure? It's the message it sends. The U.S. is willing to go to extraordinary lengths to enforce its sanctions. This wasn't just about intercepting a tanker. It was about sending a signal to all who might try to bypass U.S. laws. But the stakes aren't just about sanctions enforcement. The Marinera seizure is part of a larger geopolitical struggle that will shape the future of global energy markets. This event marks the beginning of a new phase in international oil politics. But there's more to come. So what exactly is the Shadow Fleet, and how does it work? At its core, the Shadow Fleet is a network of ships designed to circumvent international laws. These vessels operate under false flags, meaning they pretend to be registered in countries that aren't involved in the oil trade. This allows them to avoid detection and sanctions enforcement. The Marinera is a perfect example. It was flying the flag of Guyana, making it appear legitimate, while its true purpose was to transport Venezuelan oil. This tactic is not new. For years, Venezuela has been using these tactics to keep its oil flowing despite the pressure from U.S. sanctions. But the U.S. government has been watching closely. And now, with the Marinera's seizure, the world sees just how far the U.S. is willing to go. It's no longer just about blocking Venezuelan oil exports. It's about targeting the very system that keeps them alive. This shadow fleet isn't just a threat to U.S. interests. It's a threat to the global energy market. And as we've seen, when global energy is at stake, the world pays attention. If the seizure of the Marinera was a statement, then the interception of the MT Sophia escalated the situation. This was no longer just a battle over one vessel. It was a clear signal that the U.S. was intensifying its efforts. The MT Sophia was operating in the Caribbean, conducting illicit activities according to U.S. authorities. In this case, the U.S. Coast Guard boarded the ship without resistance. The vessel, like the Marinera, was connected to Venezuela's oil network. But this wasn't just another seizure. It was part of a broader strategy to choke off Venezuela's ability to generate revenue through oil. By targeting these vessels in international waters, the U.S. was tightening its grip on Venezuela's already fragile economy. And this time, there was a twist. Venezuela's leadership seemed to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Reports suggest that they were cooperating with the U.S. on the second tanker, signaling a shift in strategy. Could this mark the beginning of a different approach by Venezuela? The world is watching closely, waiting for what comes next. While the political and economic implications of these seizures are significant, the true impact is felt by the people of Venezuela. The nation's economy is already in free fall, and these actions only deepen the crisis. Venezuela's people are struggling to survive amidst hyperinflation, food shortages, and widespread poverty. The government may be in a battle with international forces, but the real cost is being paid by ordinary Venezuelans. Families are facing unimaginable hardships, as their livelihoods are tied to an oil industry that's increasingly out of their reach. The question arises, what does all this mean for the everyday citizen? The U.S. may argue that these actions are justified, aimed at weakening a corrupt regime. But for the Venezuelan people, this is just another layer of suffering. It's hard to ignore the human toll when entire communities are on the brink of collapse. And yet, the U.S. remains steadfast, convinced that its actions are part of a larger strategy. But can any of this truly lead to change? The people of Venezuela are left wondering what their future holds. The consequences of these actions extend far beyond Venezuela's borders. In the global energy market, any disruption to oil supply sends shockwaves through economies. Venezuela's oil is crucial not only to the country but to global energy markets, especially in countries like China, which has been a major buyer. The U.S. is attempting to sever those links, but the ripple effects are being felt worldwide. Russia's involvement adds another layer of complexity. The seizure of the Marinera, a Russian-flagged vessel, has sparked outrage in Moscow. They've called for the return of the vessel and protection for the Russian crew members. This is more than a dispute over oil, it's a geopolitical standoff. The US is sending a clear message to Russia, China, and other nations. We will not tolerate violations of sanctions. But how will other countries respond? Will they back the US stance, or will they resist? The world is watching as the balance of power shifts in real time, with consequences that could shape the future of global politics. As we look to the future, there are three potential paths ahead for Venezuela: its oil industry and the global community. First, the best-case scenario: Venezuela's government, under pressure, agrees to a political transition. This would pave the way for a new leadership that could work with the international community, lifting sanctions and stabilizing the economy. Oil production would slowly increase, and the country could begin to recover from years of turmoil. But this is far from certain. In a second scenario, the current regime holds firm, resisting any external pressure. Venezuela's economy continues to spiral downward, and oil exports remain curtailed. The government becomes more isolated, and the sanctions begin to have an even greater impact on the people. Lastly, the worst-case scenario: Venezuela descends into deeper chaos. The country becomes a battleground for external powers, further destabilizing the region. Oil remains a central commodity, but its value becomes distorted by the conflict. In this scenario, global energy markets could face even greater uncertainty, with far-reaching consequences for economies worldwide. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: Venezuela's fate will continue to shape the global stage, and the world will be forced to respond. As we conclude this analysis, one thing is undeniable: the US has entered a new phase in its campaign against Venezuela's oil trade. The seizure of 2 tankers is just the beginning. The impact of these actions will ripple through the global economy and geopolitical landscape for years to come. But there's more at stake than just oil. It's about the future of sanctions enforcement, the power of the US in shaping global trade, and the role of energy in international relations. The path ahead will not be easy. Venezuela's leadership faces immense pressure, both internally and externally. And yet, the people of Venezuela remain in the middle of this struggle. The road to recovery is long, but it's not impossible. The global community must now decide how it will engage with Venezuela, its oil, and its people. Will the US continue to tighten the noose, or will diplomacy take a stronger role? The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the choices made today will define the next chapter of Venezuela's story and the world's.